I have made so many fleece cloaks for my boys. My toddlers adore them and they love to spin and twirl in their fun, whimsical fleece cloaks. Today we're gonna make one for me because I wanna match them too and I wanna have fun too. And I'm gonna show you how I do it because it is way easier than you think. The trouble if you're making your own cloak is that there's a million different patterns online, there's a million different methods to do it, different types of cloaks. When we do this, we want to do it right. We want to maximize the amount of whimsy in our cloak while minimizing the amount of actual effort we're putting in. The secret to a fun cloak is that they're actually super straightforward to make with very minimal math required, and you really don't even need that much of a pattern. The cloak that you want to make is just a circle skirt. It's the same math as a circle skirt, except it's easier than a circle skirt because if you pick a fabric that doesn't fray, you don't even have to hem it. You can just cut it and leave it as is. That weird triangle yet curved section that ends up being like cut off when you make a circle skirt, yeah, that's what we're gonna make our hood out of. So this is even a lower waist project as well. The thing about cloaks and making them out of a circle skirt is we really don't have that much math to worry about. We only need to know two numbers to make our cloak. We need to know the radius of what will be our neckline, so we can cut out the little circle of our neckline. And we need to know the radius plus the length of however long we want our cloak to be, so we can cut out the big circle. You can measure around your neck and just plug that into a circle skirt calculator as your waistband, and it will spit out what number you need to actually use as the radius of your circle if you don't want to do the math. If you do want to do the math, it's right here. The radius of your circle will be your neck circumference divided by that number because geometry. And the length is sometimes dependent on just how much fabric you have, but otherwise you can just measure it and it'll probably work. And then here you see this area of fabric right here that we cut off when we're cutting our big donut of a circle for our cloak. We're gonna take that weird triangle shape and we're gonna make it into our hood. Also, if you want maximum swish, you're gonna want a full circle. You can make a cloak out of like a 3/4 circle skirt pattern or a half circle skirt pattern. It'll work just fine. I've done it, I've made them before. But if you want maximum swish, maximum whimsy, you're gonna wanna do the full donut situation over here. So now that we've talked about the game plan, we're gonna get down on my kitchen floor because that's where I actually have space and we'll cut out some fabric. Welcome to my kitchen floor. On my way down here, I took the time to measure about how big I want my neckline to be, which is about 15 inches. And I also stood up real good and stood up straight and took some measurements for how long I want the cloak to be in general, which is about 48 inches. I measured to about ankle height because I don't want to trip over it. Now, in order to measure the circles that we're going to have to cut out, we have to do a teeny tiny little bit of math first. So first we take that neckline measurement, divide it by 6.28 and get 2.388 yada 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 some long number. We can round that to about 2.5 inches. That'll be the radius of our little circle right over here. We also need to know our big circle measurement for cutting out the body of the cloak. So we take our little circle radius of 2.5 inches. We add the length that we measured, which for me is 48 inches. For you, it's probably something different. And then we take that total number, which for me is 50.5 inches. And that's what we're going to use as the radius for our very big circle to cut out our actual cloak. So now let's lay this fabric out on my kitchen floor. I got this blue fleece like when a Joann's was closing like 8 years ago. Not in the Joann's closing, just when a particular one was closing. And I think I have about 6 yards here. So we're gonna see if this even fits. But because I am taller than a toddler, the fleece originally is on a fold here. Like it originally comes folded like every other bolt of fabric. But I'm gonna have to unfold it and work with it as like one big layer because again, I'm taller than a toddler. I'm not gonna fight this fabric to fold it in half the other way now more than I have to. So we're gonna measure about 51 inches along the length and then fold it in half and then see if we can do that from the other side in the other direction. And that will tell me if I have enough fabric to even make this thing. All right, so it just took way more effort than I thought to change this from a hot dog style to a hamburger style fold. But now we're gonna do it again and do the other side just to double check I have enough fabric. On second thought, I definitely have enough fabric here. So we're gonna cut out the big circles and I'm gonna cut out one big half circle and then I'm gonna use that and copy it onto the fabric and to make my other half circle rather than trying to measure things out multiple times. So I'm gonna measure from this corner and I'm gonna measure 2.5 inches along, make a little mark, and then follow the line all the way through to 50.5 inches and make a little mark. And we're gonna go all the way around, like all in this curve, and measure enough dots to where I can reliably follow it with the scissors and cut out a circle or half circle. I have my first half circle cut out. I need to cut out one more of these. And if I didn't have enough fabric, like if I was really uncertain about it, I would fold this like scrap from cutting out this circle. I would fold this top part back and I would use the part of the fabric that's like connected to the rest of my fabric and like lay this half circle out so it was on top of that part to try to like zhuzh pieces together and fit them better so I can cut out the whole thing. However, usually I use this section to make a hood and I have plenty of fabric to work with. So I'm going to save this area instead of doing that overlap. And I'm going to use that to make a really awesome hood because we have a lot of fabric to work with here. Wow, this scales up from like toddler size to adult size into an absolutely massive hood. So that's kind of fun. I need you to know that when I said cloaks are easy because they're circle skirts, I mean that in the sense that like the math is easy and it's straightforward to figure out and you don't need a pattern and stuff because I am so tired right now. Because this fleece takes up my entire kitchen floor. And apparently going from a toddler size fleece cloak to an adult size one is not double the work. It's like 5 times the work. I was cutting out stuff for a very long time that time lapse is going to deceive you on. And I am very tired. Time to take a break. It is now nighttime and my children are asleep and I can work on sewing more stuff. Ooh, that light change is weird. Anyway, I have 2 half circles here. I need to sew them together to make them a full circle. And I'm going to be sewing along this edge, which happens to be the selvage. Could I trim off the selvage? Probably. Am I going to? Nah. Selvage on fleece is close enough to the fleece enough that I don't really care about trimming it right now. Maybe we'll trim it for the front of the cloak, but I'm not dealing with that right now. Because this is absolutely humongous, I am going to use my extension table that I have for my sewing machine. My husband made this for me out of some very pretty maple wood. Maple? Yeah? Maple, okay. Made this for me for Christmas, and I love it so much. And it is really helpful to not have things fall off my sewing machine while I'm trying to actually sew. So there we go. Yes, okay. My bobbin's not out yet or anything. I was worried there for a second. All right. Speed run. So here's our seam. So we now have a full donut of fabric in all its glory. And obviously, because this is a curve neckline, this is going to be more than 15 inches. I already know that. So we'll work with that when we get to the hood, but I want to do a preliminary. I think I bumped my mic, so if this sucks, but oh, this is so fun. Hey, look. I'm like a bird. I can just, oh wait, hold on. You can just really like maximize the Snape flouncing through the hallway. Oh, I just need a hood and a button and I'm good to go. Maybe 2 buttons, honestly. Like a button at the neck to hold it closed. And then maybe another button a little further down just to hold it a little more closed. So it's not quite, this is like a full length. I measured to my ankles and now it is sweeping the floor. So I think that was a good choice. So I'm not like tripping over it when I walk. Yeah, oh, it's gonna be so fun. Okay, gotta finish it now. All right, so I have 2 options for buttons here. These blue ones match a lot closer to the fabric than it looks on camera, but I think we're gonna go with the wooden ones because I like the vibes better. Before we put the buttons on though, and the button loops, I wanna put the hood on so we can make sure we actually know where we want the buttons to be. Since I'm doing 2 buttons and everything, I wanna make sure it lines up and looks nice still. So hood first. So first I wanna double check the neckline because we cut it at 15 inches for neckline. We did a little bit of rounding on the radius though, and also the seam allowance of sewing this together probably shrunk it back down a little bit. So I want to get this neckline straightened out as possible so I can just kind of estimate how long the neckline of the hood's actually going to be. And we started at 15 inches. And with the selvage and the seam allowance and everything, that's at about 19 inches now. It's always going to stretch a little bit because this circle means that there's some bias and stretch, and fleece is already a little bit flexible, so that's just to be expected. So that means when we make the hood, I need about 19-ish, 19 and a half inches on the neckline of the hood to make sure it lines up properly. This is a remnant from cutting out the big circles. I'm currently sitting where the first big circle was cut from. So we need to trim off the side where the face of our hood is going to be, and then we will talk about how we're going to make this hood. Actually, after thinking about it, I was wrong. I'm not going to trim here. Because the thing is, on the cloaks I've made for my toddlers, I try to make it so the hood has the fold on the top of the head, so the hood doesn't have a seam running across the top of the head. And I think I like that look better, and I want to have that for my cloak too. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to unfold this half, which has the fold along that side from cutting out the first circle, and refold it so that this edge meets with this edge, and I can use this here as my fold for my hood, and that way I don't have a weird seam running down the back of the top of my head, because I think that'll look nicer, and I deserve a nice cloak just as much as my toddlers do, so that's what we're going to do instead.
Subscribe for more late night sewing and adding whimsy to my life.
Let it be known that some of my best sewing and some of my worst sewing have all come out of being sewn after 10 o'clock at night. Good morning. I did not want to get bit by the bad sewing bug after 10 o'clock at night, so I went to bed. And now I'm mildly well rested, caffeinated, and definitely coming down with a cold, so let's get more sewing done. So yesterday we ended with refolding the scrap fabric from cutting out the big circles for the cloak into what is going to become our hood. So I have the fold of the fabric up along this top edge, and that's going to be like the top of my head. Then we've got this edge here, which is open, and it's like a selvage edge, and that's going to be the front of the hood. And then we've got this whole long skinny leer pipe situation back here. Now, the situation is, if I were to do what I did for my toddler's cloaks, I would take the neckline measurement, which we know from yesterday is about 20 inches. So half of that is 10 inches, and I would just run this down along this section of fabric, find where it was 10 inches wide, and chop it there. This is the 10-inch mark. If I did this on here, I would end up way further down on the fabric, and I would have a like very stupidly big hood. But I don't think that's gonna work for me. See, already at this level of the fabric, we're like 30 inches down on the fabric there. And if I measure across my head from like shoulder to shoulder to get a like loose-ish kind of fitting hood sort of measurement, that is 30 inches. Double that would be 60 inches, which would be like the length of my measuring tape. And if I tried to line that up on me, that's a very aggressively big hood. And I don't think that's quite what I want. Instead of doing the method that I did for my toddler cloaks, I'm gonna find the spot coming down from the fold that hits about 15 or 16 inches, which is about here-ish. I'm going to take that spot and also find where measuring in, I get the neckline measurement about here, and we're going to cut there and then like zhuzh that and merge that into the curve that we already have here, so it's one cohesive flowing curve. And that way the hood will actually, like the necklines of the hood and the cloak can be sewn together, and the hood will actually fit on my head and not just flop off and just go everywhere. And we'll still have the long leer pipe sort of situation coming off of here. If you're making a cloak for a smaller person, such as a toddler or child in your life, you can pretty much just get away with taking the like neckline measurement, or half the neckline measurement because we're working on the fold, and lining it up on this section wherever it meets the curve here, and that's where you would cut it, and that's where your neckline would be. But I am bigger than a toddler, so I have to make some adjustments to how I typically do this. but I'm still using a ton more of the scrap fabric. After some finagling, we have our very long hood. I've got the neckline down here at about 20 inches total, so we can have some room for seam allowance here for sewing this curve. And we've got this curve leading into a long skinny leer pipe section. If I want to do a test run of it, I'm gonna unfold it and be like, this is neckline to neckline. Huh. I've got a pretty fun hood situation going on, which right now looks very, I got a little mini cape at the back. I'm sewing the curved edge to make it a full hood, but I'm starting that seam on the neckline side to make sure that the neckline is lined up properly. And then we're gonna go back to sewing the point. And I'll probably sew the point just like how you would sew a dart, if you know how to do that. But we're gonna sew it and continue sewing until it goes like off the fabric, just to make sure we have a nice point there for when we turn this thing right side out. Trim off some fabric and turn this right side out.
All right, so turning the hood right side out is pretty straightforward. I trimmed off the extra fabric so it would turn right side out more pointy, and then I don't recommend you do this, but I did use the end of my scissors to push the point out pointier.
Let's see if I can just... Oh, that's fun. It's almost pulling itself backwards because of how big it is, so I might revisit how long it is. I have a ridiculously long like leer pipe going on in the back. Oh my goodness, it goes like to my knee, past my knees. That's so silly, but also this gives me a really fun idea for like a kid's dinosaur cloak. Something about this gives me like dinosaur cloak vibes. So we might have to explore that in another video. So because the cloak is made up of 2 half circles, that means we have our seam along the very back of the cloak, which makes it really easy because this curved seam of our hood gets lined up right sides together to the back seam of the cloak. And we can stick those 2 together, and then I'm going to sew from this middle point to make sure it stays lined up. We're going to start here and sew to the outside on one side of the cloak, and then sew the other side to the outside on the other side. And that way they'll stay lined up and they shouldn't shift towards one direction or the other while I'm sewing. So that's what we're going to do next. And admittedly, sewing the straight neckline of the hood to the curved neckline of the cloak is the trickiest sewing part of this whole thing. Like, the rest of it's pretty straightforward. The math is straightforward. Cutting out takes forever, but it's straightforward. This part is the tricky part in the actual sewing stuff. But once we get through this, it's smooth sailing because we just have to add some buttons and we're done. So I've got one half of it sewed, and as you can see, I have to finagle all this other fabric in place over here to sew the other half. I do have to like stretch the neckline of the cloak just a tiny bit to fit it to the hood. It's a curved neckline, so it stretches anyway, so it's kind of for the best, to be honest. We just need to figure out where the buttons go. For my toddlers, I like fold the brim of the hood, if you can call it a brim, back a little bit like that, because otherwise it falls on their face, and I feel like it helps it stay better. I want a button like at the neckline. So I want another button to be maybe like just a foot further down or so, maybe there-ish a bit, just to hold it closed just a little bit better.
I hand sew my buttons on because trying to do buttons on a sewing machine scares me, and it's just easier this way for me.
Now to make the button loops, I'm gonna take like some offcut rectangle-ish pieces, and I'm gonna fold it in thirds like this. And then I'm just gonna run a line of stitching down the middle to hold it all down and hold it in place so that we can fold it in half and it'll be a cute little button loop. All right, so I've lined up the 2 front edges of the cloak, and I want to have the button loops so that they basically just overlap this edge here, because that way when the actual buttons are through the loops, it will keep these 2 edges fully closed. So to make it more secure, I'm gonna line up the button loops even with the buttons, and so that they're fully on this other side of fabric, just to hold things closed a bit better. And this means it's done. I'm gonna like go and trim up some random threads and stuff, and then we will get some fun action shots and end of project shots. So I'm so excited.
outside when I was jumping around on a log in my parents' backyard to film those clips just now. I was toasty the whole time, so this is actually a very functional cloak, as well as being fun as heck. So subscribe if you want to see more sewing projects in the future from me or other whimsical endeavors, because I really like making this video and I would like to make more of them. We'll hang out again soon.
Parkour!